The moment Harlan Beauchamp walked into that courtroom, with a mop bucket, nobody stood up. Nobody moved their briefcase. Nobody held the door. One attorney, young guy, expensive shoes, actually pulled his coat closer to his body, like Harlan might get something on it just by existing nearby. Harlan was 63 years old. He had a bad knee, a gray beard he kept meaning to trim, and the kind of face that had stopped being remarkable to people about 20 years ago. He wore the gray maintenance uniform of the Denton County Courthouse, the logo stitched over his left breast pocket in faded navy thread. He pushed his bucket to the corner of the hall outside courtroom 4 and wrung out the mop with both hands. Slowly, the way a man does when his joints remind him of every year he's lived. Nobody saw him. That was the thing about Harlan. He had become the kind of man that rooms forgot. But Harlan saw everything. He had been working in that courthouse for 11 years. Before that, maintenance at a federal building in Fort Worth. Before that, 16 years as a paralegal at a mid-size firm in Dallas. A firm that dissolved when the senior partner retired, and the junior partners scattered like seeds in wind. Harlan had been 51 with no degree and no safety net, and the only job he could find that didn't require a college diploma was the one that had him cleaning the offices of people who had one. He never talked about his past at work. What was the point? Nobody asked. So he mopped. He restocked the paper towel dispensers. He replaced the light bulbs in the east corridor and fixed the leak under the sink in the third-floor bathroom. He said good morning to the judges when he passed them in the hall. Some nodded back, most didn't, and he ate his lunch alone in a supply closet he'd quietly converted into a break room by bringing in a folding chair and a small radio. He listened to that radio every day. Classical station, mostly. Sometimes jazz. His late wife, Josephine, had loved jazz. She had been gone 9 years. The music kept her close in a way that photographs no longer could. That was Harlan's life. And if you'd asked anyone in that courthouse to describe the maintenance man on the 3rd floor, they probably would have said, older fella, quiet, gray beard, keeps to himself. They wouldn't have mentioned that he'd spent the last 4 years teaching himself Mandarin. It started the way strange things often start in grief, by accident. Josephine had been studying it before she got sick. She'd bought the books, the audio courses, all of it. She wanted to travel. She had a whole list. Places she'd circled in magazines and dog-eared in travel guides she kept in a basket by the armchair. Hong Kong, Chengdu, Zhangjiaji. She'd shown Harlan once, tracing her finger across a map, and he'd said, someday, Joe, the way you say things when you think there's time. After she passed, Harlan found her language books on the shelf. He stood there in their bedroom for a long time. Then he picked one up, sat down in her armchair, and opened to the first page. It took him 6 months, just to get the tones right. He practiced in the supply closet. He murmured syllables under his breath while he mopped. He filled 3 notebooks in his first year. Careful handwriting, vocabulary lists, notes on grammar, little drawings where words connected to things. He found YouTube channels, podcasts, a free tutoring exchange online, where a retired schoolteacher in Chengdu named Mr. Wei spent an hour with him every Sunday morning over video call, patient and kind, correcting his pronunciation with gentle laughter. 4 years in, Harlan could hold a real conversation. Not perfect, but real. No one at the courthouse knew. There was no reason they would. He had never been asked to contribute anything beyond clean floors and functioning restrooms. And people who are never asked stop volunteering. The case that broke everything open was called Meridian Capital V, Longshore Development Group, and it was, by any measure, a complicated disaster. Harlan first heard about it the way he heard about most things, by being invisible while other people spoke. He was changing the trash liners in the hall outside the conference rooms the week before trial, when 2 of the Longshore attorneys walked past, talking fast and low. Shu's not going to accept the arbitration clause. One of them was saying, he's made that clear. If Chen doesn't deliver the right language in that contract by Friday, we're done. Chen's working on it. Chen's been working on it for 3 weeks. They rounded the corner and were gone. Harlan tied off the liner, placed it in his cart, and went back to work. But he kept listening. The case, as he understood it from 11 years of ambient courthouse knowledge, involved a real estate investment group out of Beijing, headed by a man named Franklin Xu, who had entered into a development agreement with a Texas-based firm called Longshore Development Group. The deal was worth somewhere in the range of $800 million. A planned mixed-use development on a stretch of Gulf Coast land that Longshore had been trying to monetize for a decade. They needed Xu's capital. Xu's group needed the land rights and local permits that only Longshore could navigate. It had all gone sideways somewhere in the contract language. Harlan didn't know the specifics, but he knew arbitration clauses. He knew contract disputes. He had spent 16 years watching them from the paralegal seat, organizing documents, cross-referencing exhibits, sitting in the back of depositions taking notes that the attorneys then rewrote and signed their names to. He knew enough to know that when two attorneys are speedwalking down a hallway arguing about contract language 3 days before trial, the situation is serious. He also knew that when someone says the other side doesn't accept the clause, it usually means the other side has read the clause very carefully and found something inside it they don't like. He put that away in the back of his mind and went to fix the paper towel dispenser in the 4th floor restroom. The day before trial, Harlan arrived early. He always arrived early. There was a quality to the courthouse in those first 40 minutes before it filled. A gray morning stillness that he genuinely liked. The marble floors caught the light differently when they were empty. The building had been built in 1931, and it still had the bones of something that had been meant to matter. He respected that. He was in the East Corridor with his cleaning cart when he heard the voices in Conference Room B. The door wasn't fully closed. He wasn't trying to listen, but the voices were raised, and when voices are raised behind improperly closed doors, they carry. A woman's voice, sharp, controlled panic. He's saying the governing law clause was altered after the term sheet. He's saying it's fraudulent. A man's voice. He cannot prove that in court. He doesn't need to prove it in court, Leonard. He needs to believe it. And right now he believes it, and he's walking. Harlan's hands went still on the cart handle. The woman again. His team flew 12 hours for this meeting. He sat across that table, he looked at the contract, and he stood up. That's where we are. He's in the lobby right now. He hasn't left the building yet, but he's getting his coat. Silence. Then Leonard. Where's Chen? Chen's on the phone, trying to reach someone from their legal team who speaks English. But Xu won't talk to Chen. He's done talking to our people. Another silence. Longer. Harlan stood very still. His mop was in his hand. Through the gap in the door he could see the corner of a conference table, a laptop, a woman in a dark blazer pressing her fingers to her forehead. He thought about Josephine's travel books. He thought about Mr. Wei on Sunday mornings, patient and amused, saying again, Harlan. From the beginning.
You're almost there.
He thought about the 16 years he had sat in the back of rooms like this one, watching other people solve problems he had already solved in his head. He set down his mop. He knocked on the conference room door. The woman who answered it was Claudette Moreau, lead attorney for Longshore Development Group. She was 52, precise, with silver-streaked hair, pulled back in a way that communicated she had not slept well, and was not interested in being tested. She looked at Harlan. She looked at his cart. She looked at his uniform. Maintenance, she said. We're in the middle of something. Can it wait? Ma'am, Harlan said. I think I might be able to help you. She stared at him. I heard what you said about Mr. Xu, he continued, keeping his voice calm and quiet. I'm not trying to overstep, but I speak Mandarin, and I know contract law. The man called Leonard, standing behind Claudette, let out a short breath that wasn't quite a laugh. You speak Mandarin, he said. Yes, sir. You're the maintenance. Leonard, Claudette said. The way she said it made Leonard stop. She was looking at Harlan with a different expression now. Not warmth, not quite respect, but something more useful than either, attention. You speak Mandarin, she said again without mockery. 4 years. Self-taught. I'd call myself functional. maybe a step past. I also spent 16 years as a paralegal at Garfield and Marsh in Dallas before they closed. I know what a governing law clause is supposed to look like. The silence in the room was the kind that has weight. Claudette looked at Leonard. Leonard looked at his shoes. Mr. Shu is in the lobby, Harlan said. You said he hasn't left yet. Claudette straightened. She did the math that people do when they are out of options and something improbable presents itself. Harlan had watched attorneys do it many times. The calculation was always the same. What do I have to lose that I haven't already lost? Come with me, she said. Franklin Shu was 67 years old, and he was standing near the lobby entrance with his overcoat already on, speaking in low Mandarin to a younger man beside him, an associate. From the look of him, taking notes on a tablet. 2 other members of his team stood nearby. They all had the contained, careful posture of people who have been insulted and have chosen dignity over reaction. Claudette approached. Sue looked at her. Then he looked at Harlan. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes sharpened. The way a person's attention sharpens when something doesn't fit the pattern they expected. Harlan stepped forward. He held himself the way Josephine had always told him to hold himself, in the years when he'd been young, and had tried to make himself smaller in rooms where people made him feel like an intrusion. Harlan, she used to say, you take up exactly as much space as you're supposed to, he said in Mandarin. Mr. Shu, I apologize for disturbing you. My name is Harlan Beauchamp. I work in this building. I've heard that there's been a concern raised about the governing law clause in your contract. I don't represent anyone here, but if you're willing to give me 5 minutes, I'd like to understand what you saw. Sue looked at him for a long moment. He answered in Mandarin, you work here. And he gestured not unkindly toward the cart still visible at the end of the hall. Maintenance, Harlan said. Yes, I wasn't always. Something shifted in Shu's face. Not warmth, that would come later, but a kind of recalibration. He glanced at his associate, then back to Harlan. 5 minutes, he said. They sat in a small side room off the lobby. Claudette stayed. Leonard did not. Shu's associate sat with a tablet. The 2 other team members remained by the door. Shu placed the contract on the table and opened it to a page near the middle. He pointed to a paragraph. He said, in Mandarin, that the language in this clause was not the language that had been presented in the term sheet 6 weeks prior. Specifically, the governing law had shifted from a neutral international arbitration standard to Texas state law. A change that, in his legal team's estimation, significantly disadvantaged his group in any dispute scenario. He said that this change had been made without discussion, without notification, and without his consent, he said. I do not do business with people who alter documents after they are agreed upon, whatever the reason. Even if it is an error, the error tells me something about who I am dealing with. Harlan listened. He nodded. Then he asked, carefully, Mr. Shu, when did you first see this contract version? The one with this clause? This morning. At the table. And the term sheet, do you have it with you? Sue looked at his associate. The associate opened a folder and slid a document across the table. Harlan put on his reading glasses, the ones he kept in his breast pocket, the cheap ones from the drugstore, with the little scratch on the left lens, and he read the term sheet. He read it the way he had learned to read documents in 16 years of being the person who actually read them. Slowly, in order, noticing what was present and what was absent. Then he read the clause in the contract again. He sat back. Miss Morrow, he said in English, would you look at Section 14B of the term sheet and then Section 9 of the contract? Claudette leaned forward. Her eyes moved fast. Then they stopped. That's a version error, she said quietly. This is from the February draft. The March revision superseded this. This shouldn't have been in the final document. Is there a way to verify that? Document history, email chain, something with a timestamp? Claudette was already on her phone. Harlan turned back to Shu in Mandarin. Mr. Shu, it appears this may be a document version error. The wrong draft was assembled into the final package. I want to be honest with you. I can't guarantee that on their behalf. But if the document history confirms what Ms. Morrow is describing, then this clause was not intentionally altered. It was an administrative mistake. That is a significant mistake, Sue said. Yes, Harlan said. It is. And you have every right to make whatever decision you make based on that. But I thought you deserved to know what the evidence seems to show before you walked out. Sue was quiet for a moment. He looked at the term sheet. He looked at the contract. He looked at Harlan. Who are you? He said again. But this time the question wasn't rhetorical. Harlan smiled slightly. I'm the man who changes the light bulbs on the third floor. Sue didn't smile, but something in him, some held-tight tension that had been there since he'd walked out of that conference room, eased just slightly. The way a fist opens. Claudette's paralegal found the email chain in 11 minutes. The February draft had been mistakenly re-uploaded to the document management system when a new associate reorganized the shared folder. The March version, the agreed version, was intact. The timestamps confirmed it. The associate who'd made the error had already sent an email that morning, apparently realizing the mistake and not knowing what had happened as a result. It was, as these things sometimes are, a catastrophe born of a filing error made by someone who had been working too many hours and moving too fast. Claudette presented all of it to Shu's team. She didn't minimize the mistake. She said it plainly, took responsibility for her firm's oversight, and offered whatever verification Shu's legal team needed. Shu's team took 90 minutes. Harlan went back to his cart and finished the east corridor. He refilled the soap dispensers in the second-floor restroom. He ate his lunch, a chicken sandwich and an apple. In his supply closet with the radio on, a Coltrane record drifting through the small space. He was almost done with his afternoon rounds when Claudette found him. She looked, for the first time since he'd met her that morning, like a person who had come down from a high altitude and was still adjusting to the air. He's coming back to the table, she said. Harlan nodded. I need to know. She started and then stopped. She looked at him the way people look when they are reconfiguring something they thought they understood. You said 16 years as a paralegal. Yes, ma'am. At Garfield and Marsh. Yes. Why are you? She stopped again. Harlan waited. He had been waiting his whole life for people to finish that sentence. They rarely did. I want you to sit in on the rest of this, Claudette said instead. If you're willing. Not as maintenance. As, I don't have a title that fits. As someone who understands what's happening in both languages. Harlan looked at his cart. He looked at the clock on the wall. He looked at Claudette Morrow, who was asking him, for the first time in a long time, what he was capable of. I've got the third-floor bathrooms at 2, he said. She blinked. I'll see if Fletcher can cover them, he said. He sat at the end of the conference table for the rest of that afternoon. He did not pretend to be something he wasn't. When Shu's team raised a point in Mandarin, Harlan translated, accurately, without softening or editorializing. When the English language grew dense with legal terminology, he bridged it without condescension. When Shu's associate challenged a specific indemnification clause, Harlan said, quietly, he's right to flag that. The language is ambiguous. You'll want to tighten it. Claudette looked at him and said, agreed. The attorneys on both sides kept glancing at him. Some of them with confusion. Some with the particular discomfort of people who have been in rooms like this for 20 years and have never once sat next to someone wearing a maintenance uniform. Franklin Shu, for his part, addressed Harlan directly 3 times during the afternoon session. Not through Claudette, not through the room. Directly, he asked Harlan's interpretation of a particular phrase. He asked whether the timeline in a subclause was realistic by American legal standards. He asked, near the end of the afternoon, whether Harlan thought the revised document was sound. Harlan read it through his scratched reading glasses. I think it's significantly improved, he said in Mandarin. I'd want your own attorneys to review the final copy carefully, but I don't see anything here that wasn't agreed to. Sue nodded slowly. Thank you, he said. For staying, you said 5 minutes, Harlan said. I went a little over. For the first time all day, Franklin Shu smiled. The deal closed 9 days later. Harlan heard about it from Fletcher, who heard about it from the security guard at the front desk, who had seen the handshakes in the lobby. Harlan was cleaning the elevator at the time. He nodded, said good, and went back to the elevator. 2 days after that, Claudette Morrow came to find him again. She brought a man with her, older, silver-haired, the kind of posture that came from decades of being the most important person in every room he walked into. She introduced him as Bernard Winslow, the managing partner of the firm. Bernard Winslow shook Harlan's hand. He looked at him the way Claudette had, that recalibration. But on him it sat differently. Less adjustment, more acknowledgement. Like a man who had seen enough of life to know that the universe did not always put talent in the packaging you expected. "I'd like to offer you a position," Winslow said. Harlan looked at him. "What kind of position?" "To start. Senior consultant, international contract support. We have 4 cases with Chinese-speaking parties in the next calendar year. And I have a feeling that's not all you bring to the table." "I don't have a law degree," Harlan said. "I know. I also don't have a maintenance certificate, and I suspect that doesn't make either of us less qualified to do what we're actually good at." Harlan was quiet for a moment. He thought about the supply closet, the folding chair, the radio and the Coltrane record, and the sandwich and the apple. He thought about Josephine's travel books in the basket by the armchair, the circled cities. Chengdu, Zhangjiajie. "Someday, Joe." "What does it pay?" he said. Winslow named a number. Harlan did not react. He had spent 16 years in law firms watching people not react to numbers, and he had learned from them. "I'll need a few days," he said. "Of course," Winslow said. They shook hands again. Winslow and Claudette left. Harlan stood in the hallway for a moment, his cart beside him, the marble floor clean and empty ahead of him. Then he took his radio out of the supply closet, tucked it under his arm, and went to find Fletcher to tell him he'd need to take over the East Corridor tomorrow. "There's something I want to say before we're done here. I've thought about Harlan Beauchamp a lot, since I first heard this story, about the 11 years he spent in that courthouse, unseen. About the notebooks full of Mandarin vocabulary he kept in his apartment. About the Sunday mornings with Mr. Wei in Chengdu, 2 men on opposite sides of the world, practicing patience across a video screen. Nobody gave Harlan Beauchamp a second chance. There was no dramatic moment where someone recognized his potential and reached down to lift him up. Claudette Morrow didn't see a hidden genius when she looked at him. She saw a maintenance man offering an improbable solution on the worst morning of her professional week. She took the offer not out of fairness but out of desperation. And that was enough. That's the part nobody talks about in these stories. The person in that uniform had to be ready, had to have spent 4 years talking to a retired schoolteacher in Chengdu about tones and grammar, and the particular way certain feelings don't translate. Had to have kept those legal instincts sharp through 11 years of invisibility, reading case summaries in the courthouse library on his lunch break, following decisions in the trade journals he still subscribed to. Had to have shown up every single morning, done the work that was asked of him, and never, not once, let the smallness of other people's vision become his own. You may be in a room right now where nobody sees you. Maybe you've been in that room for years. Maybe you've started to believe that the room is right about you. It's not. The skills you carry don't ask permission to exist. The knowledge you've built in the quiet hours, early mornings, late nights, lunch breaks, the back of a folding chair, in a supply closet, with a radio and a grief you've turned into purpose. That knowledge is real, whether or not anyone in that room has ever thought to ask about it. Harlan Beauchamp was 63 years old when that door wasn't quite closed. He was ready when it opened.